Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we have a lot to unpack, so bear with me here. But I'm asking the question, could a Russian invasion of Ukraine be tied to REvil or REvil's arrests? And here's what's going on, and a lot of news has come to light in the last week or so, but the last 24 to 48 hours is starting to shape up in rather interesting ways. And so let's examine some of these recent stories. And I have actually a couple of different theories or possibilities here to share with you. But if you're not basically keeping up with this kind of news, this is rather important because it is world shaping. And here is the backdrop, and this is what's going on overall. Russia has been amassing a military presence on the Ukraine border for weeks, and basically that has been heightening tensions in the region to the point where President Biden himself spoke to President Putin and issued a warning and spoke of a desire for de-escalation. If you didn't know, roughly 100,000 Russian troops, and obviously the support infrastructure for those troops, vehicles, etc., are now on the border of Ukraine, and that is very concerning. Now, according to the New York Times, on December 30th, President Putin warned President Biden that any economic sanctions imposed on Russia, if Russia moves to take new military action against Ukraine, could result in a, quote, complete rupture, end quote, of relations between what are essentially the two largest nuclear superpowers on the planet. That's the backdrop of this entire thing. But here's the recent news from the last 24 to 48 hours or so. Multiple reporting outlets on January 14th, today as I'm talking to you, said basically that the United States has information that indicates Russia has pre-positioned a group of operatives to conduct a false flag operation in eastern Ukraine in an attempt to create a pretext for an invasion. A U.S. official speaking to various outlets, basically on the record but not declaring his or her name, said that the United States has evidence that these operatives are trained in urban warfare and in using explosives to carry out acts of sabotage against Russia's own proxy forces. Essentially, if they attack Russia from within Ukraine borders, Russia that then has a pretext to simply launch those 100,000 troops into Ukraine, and here we go. Now, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said the Defense Department has credible information indicating that Russia has, quote, pre-positioned a group of operatives to execute an operation designed to look like an attack on them or Russian-speaking people in Ukraine in order to create a reason for a potential invasion. Now, on top of this, there's other alarming news. Also today, on January 14th, Ukraine was hit by a major cyber attack that basically launched warnings across government websites to, quote, be afraid and expect the worst. The cyber attack unfolded hours after talks wrapped up with basically no breakthrough between Russia and Ukraine's Western allies, which fear that Moscow could launch a new military assault on Ukraine. If you recall, they also invaded the country in 2014, annexing the Crimea region. According to the government in Kyiv, Ukraine President Zelensky had proposed a three-way meeting with the leaders of Russia and the United States. Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, said, and I quote, "This is life and death," because his country is now hanging in the balance. Russia denies plans to attack Ukraine, but says it could take unspecified military action unless its demands, including a promise by the NATO alliance to never admit Ukraine, essentially are met. Now, on top of this, we actually have news out of Washington, D.C. as well today. Senior Biden administration officials are warning that the United States could throw its weight behind a Ukrainian insurgency should President Putin invade Ukraine, should the Russians invade Ukraine. Now, how the United States, which just exited obviously 2 decades of war in Afghanistan, I literally did a TED talk on that, might pivot to funding and supporting an insurgency basically from fighting one is still being worked out. In other words, they're trying to figure out how exactly we, meaning the United States, would aid Ukraine in the event of a Russian invasion. But even a conversation about how far the United States would go to subvert Russian aims in the event of an invasion has basically revived the specter of a new Cold War and suddenly made real, essentially, the prospect of beginnings of a great power conflict. That's a huge problem. And we are actually not done, because we actually have some more interesting news out of Moscow that is happening today. Russia has arrested and charged several members of the ransomware gang group REvil or REvil at the request of the United States. Russia's FSB intelligence bureau said that REvil has ceased to exist, but there was no indication if any of the suspects would be extradited to the United States, which was requested by the US government. Officials basically said the investigation stemmed from an American request, with the arrest coming 2 months after federal officials in Washington offered $10 million as a reward for information leading to the identification or location of REvil members. Now, the FSB worked with local police to search 25 addresses, and this is according to the FSB, and they also added that they detained 14 people and seized assets, including 426 million rubles. I do not know the conversion on that. Also, $600,000 US in cash and 500,000 euros in cash as well, not to mention computer equipment and 20 luxury cars. You've actually seen videos of them going up and down the streets in Russia in their Lamborghinis, just acting like the fools. So there you go. Now, members of the ransomware group have been arrested, could face up to 7 years in prison under Russian law. So hear me out here, because I've got a couple of different theories, and let's start with this. Russia has obviously been feeling escalated tension for about a year now, essentially, basically, due to their safe harbor of ransomware gangs. They've historically turned a blind eye to this because their intelligence wing, the FSB, has used these types of gangs like REvil as cutouts to do intel gathering and hacking work for them. If you recall, basically Yahoo, when they had their massive data breach of 3 billion mailboxes hit, it was a Russian national living in Canada that was essentially a cutout for Russian intelligence looking for 80 specific mailboxes in Yahoo of senior US government officials. And what do you do if you're trying to hide the fact you're hacking 80 specific US government officials? You hack them all. 3 billion hit. That was essentially what they were doing, and Russia turns a blind eye to these things. Fortunately, that individual was caught and extradited to San Francisco for trial. Now, it seems to me that these arrests of REvil, assuming the Russian government will actually detain and prosecute them and not simply put them to work in some other way, is designed to placate the United States, as Russia's primary focus is now Ukraine. Now think about this. They basically have a history of ignoring this kind of thing, and now when they're amassing troops for what looks like an invasion while preemptively launching cyber attacks against their target, they now arrest criminal hackers? I mean, this appears to be more of an attempt to basically have a sleight of hand de-escalation than them actually taking this kind of thing seriously. Basically, they get to basically have the United States ease up because essentially the United States got something that it wanted while the United States gears up to invade Ukraine. But with that, there's alternate theories too. Now think about it in this essentially aspect. Russia has, let's assume for a moment, Russia has zero intention of invading Ukraine and is instead using this military buildup as leverage in negotiations with the United States to ensure Ukraine doesn't join NATO, while they bide their time and attempt to destabilize the Ukraine government by throwing what they hope is a perceived dissident coup. So think about this. They disable, or rather, they lower the standards of the government. They make the government essentially, in the eyes of Ukrainian people, basically as ineffective, and therefore they're able to plan operatives and create what is known as a dissident coup, meaning it looks like a grassroots, groundswell attack against the government, but it's coming from within the borders. And there you go. So they can destabilize the government, throw what is known as a dissident coup, not a military coup or an auto coup or self coup, and here we are. In this case, arresting REvil would then be intended to be used as a smokescreen to give the United States, once again, something it wants without Russia having to give an inch on Ukraine. And so there you go. Now, in terms of REvil, here's yet another alternative that I'm thinking about as I'm thinking these things through. And I think any one of these could be accurate, or maybe I'm completely wrong here, but I think this is really interesting, and I'd love to have a discussion on this. So think about it this way. The Russian government likes to leverage the talents of REvil and other groups like them for their own purposes. REvil has recently been in the news a lot for major cyber attacks like Kaseya. So Russia wants to basically take the heat off of one of their favorite assets on the intelligence side, so they can basically stage these arrests and then let them reform as a new group and carry on under a new banner with basically new tactics, etc., etc. Now, this ensures that they can keep using REvil, and REvil can make basically more money as another entity, whatever they call themselves in the future. Now, if you recall, I mentioned at the end of 2021 in my 2022 cybersecurity predictions video and podcast for this year that these types of groups would be laying low in 2022 due to basically international law enforcement scrutiny. And so these arrests would obviously give them excellent cover. So those are my three main theories. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And either way, we are going to see what happens in Ukraine, but we're also going to see if the members of REvil are actually in trouble and they're not just reforming. And I think we'll know that pretty quick as soon as we start seeing those kinds of attacks again. So with that, good luck to Ukraine and everybody else involved. And hopefully REvil is finally done and actually arrested. That would be great. And so that is your complex, interesting, and Russian, Ukraine, US, and REvil news of the week. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.